Hey guys, are you taking this SAT and wondering how to approach the verbal section? Today, I'm going to share with you a few tips and strategies which will help you face the verbal section better and confidently. So the primary question that most of the students face is, do I read the passage first or questions first? Generally, the passage first. But if you end up rereading the passage to understand what's happening in there, then the passage is or the technique is obviously not working for you. Then read the questions first. If you decide to read the questions first, then the strategy that you need to follow is quickly skim through the questions, identify what each question wants you to do, like underlining the keywords in the question. Like for example, in the question, the passage is primarily focused on. So here the main focus of the question is on a passage. Or in the next question, the first paragraph serves mainly to establish. So the entire focus is on the first paragraph. So here you identify what the question really wants you to do, what exact part of the passage it wants you to focus on. Now, a few questions which are generally directed questions will always direct you to a specific line or a specific paragraph in the passage. Like for example, words in context, they generally take you back to a certain line in the passage, and what you need to do is go and underline that keyword there. And always remember, when we are talking about words in context, they are words in context. For understanding the context, you need to read at least a couple of sentences before the concerned line. Otherwise, you will never understand what the context is. And also remember, when we are talking about words in context, all the options that are provided there more or less fall into the main or the broader idea of the word in concern. But only one fits in. In order for you to understand which is the exact fit in that particular context, it's very important for you to understand the context. And like I said, it's important to read at least 2 sentences before the concerned line. Otherwise, you will never get the context. So in this example, the question asks you to go back to line 7 to understand the meaning of the word curiosity. Now, when we want to understand the context, in line 7, we need to really go back and start reading from line 1 in order to understand the context. And that is going to help us to understand the real meaning of curiosity as used in this context. Now, there are going to be a few questions which will direct you back to a few paragraphs. In that case, we need to go back to the passage and use a sidebar to mark the paragraph. So when we are reading the passage and we see that there is a certain mark alongside, we know that there is a question based on it, and we can go ahead and answer that question and come back to reading again. Like for example, in this question, the third and the fourth paragraphs, lines 18 to 33, primarily serve 2. So we know that there is a question based on paragraph 3 and paragraph 4. So we can go mark it in the passage, and while we are reading it, we know that there is a question based on this, and that is when we come back and answer the question. So how do we decide which questions you want to keep it for the end? So there are going to be questions which will expect you to go through the entire passage first in order to be able to answer that question. So we generally want to keep those questions for the end. So for example, the main purpose of the passage is to. So to answer this question, you need to really go through the entire passage, and that will help you understand and answer this question. Now that you have a fair idea about the type of questions, you can get on to reading the passage. Read the questions and read a couple of paragraphs. Answer the questions alongside and go back to reading the passage. This is the way you can read and reduce some questions as you go. You also got to be actively reading the passage. What do you mean by actively reading the passage? You got to circle, underline, or highlight important ideas mentioned in the passage. Like you can underline the names, places, dates, definitions, and summaries. This helps you understand or separate relevant information from irrelevant information. This strategy helps you locate where a certain idea has been mentioned in the passage. The other thing that you need to remember is constantly to gather evidence. Critical reading is really critical. No wonder it is called evidence-based reading. Everything needs to be supported with evidence. Gather evidence and don't get creative. Now, what do you mean by not getting creative? Don't think what you think about the characters. Rather, look for evidence within the text to come to an inference. Listen with all your senses. Understand the plot, tone, and use the patient therapist model to be a keen listener. And how do you know the tone of the author? By looking at the diction, choice of words. That is a good revelation of the tone of the author. Also, remember to map the passage. What do you mean by mapping the passage? You need to stalk the characters. You need to stalk the idea to understand what is really happening in the plot. What is the plot all about? And it really helps you to make connections. But when you make connections, you need to remember to strictly make connections with what is mentioned within the text. No past learning should interfere with what you are reading in the text. Understand the plot. Use abbreviations, use symbols to note changes in tone, conflict, revelations, beliefs, etc. The strategy that can also work is divide and rule. You can divide the passage into different parts and answer questions based on it. You can either divide it into 2 halves or 3 parts, or break them into parts of 2 paragraphs each. What do you do after dividing it? You need to read a couple of paragraphs, answer questions that are based on these paragraphs, and then go back to reading. Remember, never to stop reading. You need to read the passage till you don't answer all the questions. Now, finally, to wind up the reading strategies, remember, read with a purpose. Read to understand. Read actively. And the final thing and the most important thing is half right is not right. If an option is partially right, remember it is not right. Half right is never right on SAT. Now let us discuss a few strategies for the SAT writing and language section. It is very important for you to know what are you being tested on. If the question is relating to grammar or punctuation or sentence correction or paragraph connection. So, in case if the only thing that's changing in the option is pronoun, then we know that you are being tested on the subject-pronoun agreement rules. So, this falls under the grammar section. Like for example, in this question, the only thing that is changing in the options is just the pronoun. So, we know that this question is a grammar-related question. So when the options are the same with just the punctuation mark changing, we know that they are testing you on the punctuation rules. For example, in this question, we see that the options are all the same with just the punctuation mark moving from one word to another. So this is how we know that this is a question which relates to punctuation. Now the next type of question is the keep or delete questions. Now how do you tackle these questions? Read the passage first to see what's being tested. Decide if the underlined sentence is out of place or fitting in. This way you have already made your choice. So in case if it is out of place, you got to delete it. In case if it is fitting in, you got to keep it. Now this helps you eliminate 2 options straight down. And whatever your answer is, think of the reason and then reread the rest of the 2 options and make your choice. Like for example, in this question, the writer is considering deleting the underlined sentence. Should the sentence be kept or deleted? Like we discussed, go back to the part of the passage, think if it is fitting in, then keep it. And if it is out of place, you got to delete it. Look for reasons and then make your choice. The next type of question is the paragraph or sentence correction questions. Usually, the Peel format is used for structuring any paragraph. Let us understand what is the Peel format. P stands for point or the claim of the author, which is more general in nature, wherein he is making a claim or putting across his idea. And E stands for evidence or anecdotes, where the author has to give evidence to prove a certain claim, which supports his claim or the main point that he is trying to make there. A stands for analysis or discussion, where he wants to discuss it further and prove the certain claim or point that he is making. L stands for linking it to the main claim or the next paragraph. So we know that if a certain sentence is asked to be restructured and if it is the main point which is more general in nature, it is right at the beginning of the entire paragraph. Like for example, in this question, which choice provides the best introduction to the paragraph? So here we are talking about a question or a sentence which asks you to pick a sentence which is more general in nature, and it always needs to be right at the beginning of the paragraph. So you need to understand what is the entire paragraph talking about and which sentence in the following options is the best fit and which is more general in nature, and it needs to be placed right at the beginning of the paragraph. I hope this video was very useful to you. I wish you all the best for your upcoming SAT. Thank you.